This story is titled, My Parents Scammed Me into Coming to What They Called a Family Party, where they actually planned to humiliate me in front of everyone. But I found out beforehand and prepared a revenge plan that completely turned everything against them. Hey Reddit, I'm a 30-year-old guy who for most of my life has been treated like the odd one out in my family. It's not like I committed any crimes or randomly cut people off. I just didn't live up to the blueprint they had in mind for me. While my siblings became neurosurgeons, patent attorneys, or deans at prestigious colleges, I chose a different path. I opened a custom furniture workshop in a small coastal town. It's a peaceful life where I make good money doing what I love, and I don't bother anyone. But in my family, success only counts if it comes with a fancy title and requires a LinkedIn announcement. We're a large family. I have 3 siblings, and both my parents are still alive and together. Being around them always feels like walking into a courtroom. They don't yell. They judge. A look here, a comment there. When I told them about my furniture workshop, my mother smiled like I'd just said I was joining the circus. My brother said nothing. He just raised his eyebrows and looked away. That's how it's always been. Quiet disapproval, polite but sharp. The last time I really spent time with them was 4 years ago at a Christmas dinner that went south. Someone made a toast about hard-earned success, and I didn't clap. My sister made a passive comment about people who settle too easily, and it spiraled from there. My father told me I was wasting my potential, my mother started crying, and I stood up, said I was done being talked to like a failed experiment, and I left. Since then, I've been keeping low contact, not completely cutting them off, just enough to keep lines open for emergencies, mostly through my grandmother. She's sweet in that old-school way. She doesn't really get boundaries and will ignore a direct no. But she'll bring you your favorite pie 2 hours later. She kept trying to bridge the gap, always telling me that family is family and that time heals everything. I stopped arguing with her about it a while ago. Then, 3 months ago, I got an email from my mother inviting me to a family reunion weekend at a rented cabin up in the mountains. 3 nights, and everyone would be there. What stood out wasn't the invite itself, but the tone. My mom called me darling, and my dad added a handwritten note saying they missed me and that it would mean the world if I came. It didn't feel like their usual voice. It felt crafted, like it had been workshopped. My first reaction was to delete it, but my grandmother called me the next day, telling me she'd been the one to convince them to invite me. She said they'd changed, that they were finally ready to make things right, and that this could be a fresh start. She insisted I'd regret it if I didn't go. I was still skeptical, but my girlfriend told me maybe it was worth giving them a chance, just so I'd know for sure. We agreed that if it got weird, I'd just leave. So I drove up on Friday evening. The cabin was enormous, clearly expensive and tucked away near a small lake. When I walked in, the place was full. All my siblings were there with their spouses and kids, and even 2 cousins I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. Everyone looked surprised to see me, but not in a bad way. My mother hugged me like we were close. My father clapped me on the back and said it was good to have me there. And my older brother joked about me finally escaping my sawdust dungeon. I played along, but as the night went on, I started picking up on strange things. My name would get brought up too often. People kept mentioning how different I looked and how relaxed I seemed. I caught whispers I couldn't quite make out, and a few times I noticed people glancing at me and stopping their conversations. It wasn't outright hostility, but it wasn't nothing either. Saturday morning after breakfast, my sister stood up and said there'd be a family circle in the living room. My mother jumped in to say it was just something they wanted to try, an open group discussion about how we've all grown and changed. I wasn't interested, so I made an excuse about needing to check on something in my car. That's when I realized my keys were gone. I checked my coat, my bag, the hallway table, nothing. I asked my brother if he'd seen them, and he said no, but his answer came too fast. I asked my mom, and she just looked at me with that tight smile and said, "Maybe just stay for this first. It's important." It wasn't a discussion. It was an ambush. One by one, my family members started talking, but not about themselves, about me, how I had isolated myself, how I chose bitterness over forgiveness. My sister said she was worried about my future. My dad said he had dreams for me that I threw away. Even my youngest cousin piped up about how he wished I'd come around more because I was cool once. Nobody asked me any questions. Nobody cared about why I had pulled away. It was just a round table of carefully phrased disappointment, wrapped in concern and drenched in judgment. I sat there waiting for it to end, realizing I wasn't invited back to reconnect. I was brought back to be corrected. They had arranged the living room like it was some kind of seminar. Chairs were set up in a wide circle, and everyone had a seat already assigned except for me. My name was on a folded card in the empty chair, right between my oldest sister and younger brother. My father stood in the center, hands clasped like he was about to give a presentation. He opened with something about healing fractured bonds and taking accountability as a family. No one was smiling this time. My oldest sister was the first to speak. She talked about how she missed me, then said something about mourning the version of me that could have existed if I had made different choices. My younger brother leaned back and said I had wasted everything I had going for me. He called it embarrassing to watch me throw away my potential and even added that I could have had a real future if I hadn't settled for wood and glue. My mother's turn came next. She said she wasn't trying to be hurtful, just honest. She claimed she was worried I had fallen into depression because only someone truly lost would find happiness making furniture in a workshop instead of doing something real. She called it pretend work. Every time someone spoke, they'd look at each other like they were all just reading from the same script. Nods, soft eyes, concerned faces. It was rehearsed. I stood up and told them I wasn't going to sit through this, that it wasn't love or concern. It was manipulation, a performance dressed up as a reunion. My father raised his voice for the first time and told me to sit down and listen for once in my life. I left the room and walked upstairs to grab my bag and leave. But when I got to my room, my duffel bag was open, clothes unfolded, toiletries scattered. My phone charger was missing, and my keys were still nowhere to be found. I slammed the door and went back downstairs, straight to my father, and demanded to know where my keys were. He didn't even try to deny it. He said I'd get them back after we finished talking like a family. I turned to my grandmother, who was sitting quietly in the corner, hands clutched in her lap. I asked her if she knew what was happening. She looked at me and said gently, "They just want what's best for you." That hurt more than anything else. She was supposed to be the one person who got it. I told them all I wasn't a broken person. I didn't need fixing. I wasn't going to be paraded around like some failure so they could feel better about themselves. I raised my voice. I yelled. My mother stood up and said I was overreacting, that they were just trying to help me face hard truths, and that a mature man wouldn't run away from family when things got uncomfortable. I walked out of the cabin and started checking every vehicle in the driveway. My car was locked. I looked through the windows. No keys in sight. My father's SUV was parked behind mine. I didn't see any of his keys either, but I knew he had them on him. I pulled out my phone. Thankfully, they hadn't taken that, and called my girlfriend. I told her everything quickly. She was ready to get in her car and drive up immediately, but I told her to hold off. If it got any worse, I'd call the police first. I went back inside and told everyone I wasn't playing anymore. I said if I didn't get my car keys back, I would call the police and tell them I was being kept there against my will. My brother started laughing and said no one would believe that my loving family had trapped me at a weekend retreat. "Good luck explaining that," he smirked. My sister stood up and said she'd give me a ride home, but only if I sat through the next session, smirking as she said it like it was all a game. So I stepped back outside, walked down the gravel driveway where the cell signal was clearer, and called the local sheriff's office. I told the dispatcher I was at a family cabin, that I had been invited under false pretenses, and that my car keys were being withheld to keep me from leaving. I gave the address, described my car, and told them my name. The dispatcher said someone would be sent out. As I walked back up toward the porch, phone still in hand, everything exploded. My mother came outside, voice raised, asking if I was really calling the cops on my own blood. My father rushed out right after and reached for my phone. I stepped back and told him not to touch me. Inside, I could hear kids crying. My grandmother came to the door, shaking her head, eyes full of tears. I didn't go back in. I waited on the porch for the deputies to arrive. The tension inside was like a pressure cooker about to blow. Every window had someone behind it. Every voice was hushed, like they were already rehearsing what they'd say when law enforcement showed up. The sheriff's deputies pulled up about 40 minutes after I called. 2 of them stepped out of the car. One older, calm-looking man and a younger one who immediately scanned the property. I was standing near the driveway, phone still in my hand. As soon as they saw me, they asked if I was the one who made the call. I nodded and led them toward the front porch. The house looked quiet from the outside. You'd never guess the kind of chaos that happened just an hour earlier. But the moment the deputies knocked, my family came to life again. Too calm, too practiced. My father opened the door and welcomed them like they were guests arriving early for dinner. He smiled, told them it was a simple family disagreement, nothing serious, just some miscommunication. The deputies didn't buy it. They turned to me and asked what was really going on. I laid everything out. How I had been invited under false pretenses, how my belongings had been tampered with, how my car keys had been taken and hidden, and how they refused to let me leave unless I sat through more of their planned intervention. I showed them my empty key ring, pointed out my locked car in the driveway, and told them I had a witness, my girlfriend, who was on standby the whole time. The deputies asked my father directly if he had my keys. He paused, looked behind him for a second, then pulled them from his pocket. No apology, no explanation. He just handed them over. One of the officers gave them to me, while the other told my father that interfering with someone's ability to leave, even during a family event, was not something they took lightly. They didn't push it further, probably because I made it clear I didn't want to press charges. I just wanted my stuff and to leave without anyone trying to trap me again. They walked with me into the house while I packed. I kept it quick. Just shoved clothes back into my duffel, checked every pocket, and grabbed my phone charger from under the bed. The house was quiet. No one said a word. My siblings wouldn't even look at me. My grandmother was sitting in the corner of the living room, hands folded. She didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't blink. A part of me hoped she'd say something, anything to show she understood, but she just stayed still, like she had decided silence was safer than picking a side. As I zipped up my bag and walked toward the door, my mother finally spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. She said, "This is why you'll never be one of us again." I didn't even slow down. I just said, "That's the first honest thing you've said this weekend," and kept walking. I drove for about an hour before I met up with my girlfriend. We had arranged a halfway point in case I needed to switch cars. When I got into her car, I didn't say anything for a full minute. She didn't ask questions, just reached over and held my hand while I sat there trying to settle myself. Not from sadness, but from the kind of relief that hits after you finally walk out of something you should have left a long time ago. I didn't respond to a single message after that. My phone lit up nonstop during the drive. Calls, texts, emails. Some from my mother, some from my brother, even one from my cousin. I silenced all their numbers and changed the settings so anything from their names would go straight into the archive, unread and unseen. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain. I was done. The only person I messaged was my grandmother. I sent one final note just thanking her for all the time she had been kind to me growing up. I told her I appreciated the memories, but I would not be coming back, and I would not be in contact again. Then I blocked her number. If I didn't make it final, I knew they'd find a way to drag me back in. My girlfriend told me later that she had a bad feeling about the whole thing the moment I showed her the invitation. But she didn't say anything then because she didn't want to sway me. She knew I needed to see it for myself. What really pushed it over the edge was a call I got 2 days later from Ethan, one of my cousins. He's younger, barely out of college, but we always got along. He told me he had to talk to someone or he was going to lose it. Turns out the entire thing had been planned weeks in advance. My siblings and parents had called it a redemption retreat in their group chat. They had meetings, emails, even shared documents. They had actually written out statements for each person to say. My cousin was handed a sheet labeled Prompt #3, how his absence hurt the family. He told me he felt sick reading it. He hadn't even known what the weekend was really about until they handed him the paper the night before I arrived. That's when he realized the whole thing was never about reconnecting. It was about control. That was the nail in the coffin. I spent too many years trying to win over people who only ever saw me as a disappointment. I used to think that if I worked hard enough or stayed quiet long enough, they'd eventually see me as enough. Now I know better. There's nothing left to fix between us. I won't be at the next reunion or any other. 3 days after I got home, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with no name, no return address, just my name written in capital letters. Inside were 5 pages, all photocopied. Each one was covered in handwriting, underlined phrases, and bullet points. The first page had a heading at the top in bold marker, Intervention Talking Points. The rest of the pages were worse. Each family member had a section assigned to them. There were exact lines written out, things I remembered hearing almost word for word. My oldest sister's note said, "Open with disappointment but soften tone. Remind him he's wasting potential." Under my younger brother's section, it said, "Be blunt, call out laziness, use you've thrown your life away." My mother's portion had phrases like, frame concern as love and use his business as an example of hiding from real life. There were even rebuttals listed, counter arguments they were supposed to use if I defended myself. It was all staged, not just emotionally manipulative, but planned like a presentation. They didn't just talk behind my back. They held meetings about how to confront me. A few hours later, I got a message from Ethan. He used a different number, saying he didn't want to send anything digitally while I was still getting bombarded by everyone else. It was him. He was the one who mailed the packet. He said he took pictures of the notes during the weekend and printed them out as soon as he got home. He said he couldn't stand what happened and felt like a coward for not stepping in at the time. Ethan told me the family had been calling it the redemption weekend for over a month. There were email threads, phone calls, and even Zoom calls. He saw messages from my parents telling everyone to stay on script. That line stuck with me more than anything else. Stay on script, like it was a play, like I was a character in a story they had written without asking me. He found typed notes too. One document had sample phrases under the title Effective Confrontation. Another one was titled Managing the Subject's Pushback. They had a plan for everything. If I got angry, if I tried to leave, if I called them out. The word subject was repeated several times in those documents. Not him, not my name, just the subject. That's how they referred to me. When I showed the notes to my girlfriend, she didn't speak for a full minute. Then she looked at me and said, "This wasn't a reunion, it was a verdict. They just didn't tell you what you were on trial for." She was right. They had already decided I was guilty. All that fake warmth in the invitation was bait. Later that night, I called a lawyer. I didn't want to sue anyone. I just wanted to know where the line was. I explained everything, being invited under false pretenses, having my personal belongings tampered with, being prevented from leaving. The lawyer told me I had a real case for unlawful detainment, especially if I had decided to press charges while the deputies were present. The keys being withheld and the threats about letting me leave only if I cooperated were serious, especially in a setting where they tried to corner me without legal cause. He told me documenting everything was a good step, so I did. I wrote everything down, every detail I could remember. What time I arrived, who said what, how my father stood between me and the hallway, how my bag had been searched, what I heard my mother yelling when I walked out with the deputies. I started putting it all into a private document. Dates, times, quotes, names. Then I took one more step. I changed my phone number. I didn't tell anyone except my girlfriend and Ethan. The calls and texts had slowed down a little, but I didn't want to risk another wave of guilt tripping or ambushes disguised as apologies. I left my mailing address the same for now, but I'll be changing that soon too. There's no question in my mind anymore about whether this was just a misunderstanding. It wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't concern that went too far. It was a coordinated campaign to put me in my place. They didn't want to reconnect. They wanted to win. And they were willing to cross every line to do it. What they didn't count on was me walking out, or Ethan deciding to finally speak up, or the notes getting into my hands. They didn't expect me to pull the curtain back and see how far they were willing to go. But now I've seen it all, and once you see something like that, you don't go back. This was never about mending a relationship. It was about control. They built the script, cast the roles, and put me center stage without warning. But I'm done playing the part they wrote for me. The more days passed, the more questions started stacking up. I kept circling back to one thing. How did they all go along with it so easily? My entire family, even the ones who barely spoke during the weekend, played their parts without hesitation. It didn't make sense that a plan like that came together overnight. So I asked Ethan to dig deeper. Ethan started going through old email threads and group chats he still had access to. He didn't say much while he was doing it, just sent screenshots now and then. The first one he found was from 3 years ago, subject line, "Fixing him." It was an email from my sister to the rest of the family suggesting an intervention dinner during the holidays. She said it was time they addressed the root of the problem and that avoiding the issue would only make it worse. They postponed that plan after I skipped Thanksgiving that year. Apparently, they had tried to corner me before then. Ethan sent a screenshot from a text chain. They hadn't used my name in most of those messages. They referred to me as Project Orion. Ethan said it was a private code they made up to avoid suspicion in shared calendars and conversations. I almost laughed when I heard it. It sounded so theatrical, like a code name from a spy movie. But it fit. They weren't treating me like family. I was a mission. That alone was hard to process, but it got worse. In a long email thread, my father wrote that I chose mediocrity because success requires backbone. My brother called me emotionally fragile and said, I run the moment real life gets hard. My mother chimed in a few times with things like, maybe we coddled him too much and he's stuck in arrested development. They weren't trying to help me. They were diagnosing me like I was some sort of broken machine. Ethan kept digging. Turns out the cabin had been booked 6 months in advance. The entire family reunion idea was built around that location. It wasn't spontaneous, it wasn't warm or last minute, it was a set piece for their final act. A quiet mountain backdrop, long driveways, no nearby help, and enough bedrooms for everyone involved. They built it all like a stage. I showed the emails to my girlfriend. She sat on the couch and read every line. Halfway through, she stopped and just said, "They do not love you. They love who they think you should be." She didn't shout. She didn't try to comfort me. She just said it because it was true. I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. The way my parents skipped my trade school graduation, but flew out for my brother's second law degree ceremony. My 28th birthday, when my sister brought a self-help book instead of a gift. How every time I ever said I was hurt, the reply was either, "You're too sensitive," or "Don't twist our words." They didn't acknowledge pain. They redirected it. I went into storage and pulled out one of my old college notebooks. I used to write little entries in the margins when I couldn't sleep. I found a sentence that said, "I feel like a defective part in a perfect machine." Another one, "Every visit home makes me smaller." Even back then, I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't have the words for it. I always made excuses for them. Said they were stressed, busy, high-achieving. Said they didn't mean what they said. But now, with printed emails in my hand and Ethan's screenshots piling up, I couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't about one bad weekend. This was a long-term pattern. They used emotional control, guilt, and shame, but dressed it up as concern. I got back on the phone with the lawyer and told him everything that had come to light. He told me I'd missed the window to pursue criminal charges, but that if the harassment continued, I had solid documentation to file for a protection order or civil claim. He said to keep every note, every screenshot, every envelope. So I did. Then Ethan made his own decision. He told me he was going no contact too. He said he always felt like an outsider, always kept quiet to avoid being targeted. Watching how they treated me flipped a switch for him. He blocked their numbers, shut down the family email chain, and said he was done playing along. That same night, I sat down and wrote out a list, not to send to anyone, just for me. It was a list of every boundary they crossed, every moment they made me feel like a failure, every time I was expected to laugh while being picked apart. I didn't want to keep repeating the memories in my head. I wanted to get them out, put them down, and move on. This was never a reunion. It was a trap, not built with anger or chaos, but with planning, structure, and quiet cruelty. They didn't try to fix anything. They tried to break me into someone I never agreed to be. And when I didn't fold, they lost control. That's all it was ever about. 1 week after I changed my phone number, a thick envelope showed up at my furniture workshop. No postage, no sender, just my name written neatly in cursive. Inside was a 6-page handwritten letter from my mother. The first sentence said, "You misunderstood our intentions." The letter started with a soft tone, talking about love, misunderstanding, and how things got out of hand. But by the second page, the real message started to show. She wrote that they should have communicated better, but the intervention was still described as an act of care. Then came a long paragraph about how I had always twisted concern into control and how I chose resentment over healing. According to her, I didn't see how much they had carried me all these years. Page 4 came with a shift. A paragraph mentioned how my continued absence could complicate things with the estate in the future. Then the sentence, "Time is running out to show growth." The implication was clear: play nice or get cut out. I expected that. My father always used money as a leash. Vacations, school support, even groceries in college came with strings. I've never counted on their money. I built my business from scratch and never asked them for help. The final line in the letter said, "If you want a seat at the table, act like someone worthy of one." I read it twice, then fed it into the shredder in my office. After that, I called my lawyer and updated him on the situation. He told me to keep physical copies or photos of any future communication attempts. He said that if it escalated again, a restraining order could be filed. Ethan texted me that same night. He had received his own letter, this time from his father, my uncle. It wasn't as long, but the tone was similar. It told him that he was losing himself to weakness by siding with someone who had turned on their own blood. The message ended with a warning about irreversible consequences. I didn't reply to that either, but I did make a few changes. First, I changed the locks at both my workshop and my apartment. I didn't know who dropped off that letter, and I wasn't going to wait around to find out. Then I went to a local hardware store and bought blackout blinds for the front of the shop. I wasn't interested in giving anyone a view inside. The next morning, I pulled into my parking spot and noticed someone standing across the street. It was my sister. She didn't wave, didn't come forward, just stood there and watched the shop for a full minute before turning around and walking away. That was enough for me. I went straight to the police station and filed a harassment report. I explained everything from the intervention to the unmarked letter, and now someone showing up near my business. The officer took it seriously. He recommended installing exterior cameras and starting a dated record of anything unusual. He told me to save everything, even if it seemed minor. He also said a report would be on file, and that if any new incidents occurred, an officer could be dispatched quickly based on the prior documentation. When I got home that night, my girlfriend's father was waiting in the driveway. He's a retired contractor, handy with everything. He had a box of security equipment with him, motion lights, cameras, and a monitor system. We spent 3 hours that night installing everything around the shop and the front of my apartment. He also offered to keep backup copies of any letters or emails, just in case something ever got lost or tampered with. The next day, I bought a small fireproof safe and stored all the original documents inside. Copies of the cabin invitation, the intervention notes Ethan gave me, screenshots from the group chats, the lawyer's advice, and now the letters. If anything else comes, it'll go in there too. That night, I sat down with a blank sheet of paper. Not for them, not for court, just for me. I wrote, "You are not broken. You are never broken. You are finally free." Then I folded it and tucked it into the back of my wallet, not for motivation, just as a reminder. They tried to guilt me. They tried to bribe me. When that didn't work, they started watching from a distance, showing up silently, like I'd forget what happened. But they made one mistake. They thought the person they broke down in that cabin was still the same one standing here now. They thought I'd come back if they just dangled the right bait. They didn't expect the silence. They didn't expect the police report. They didn't expect me to fight back. I'm not afraid of being the black sheep anymore. Let them call me what they want. The scapegoat walked away, and this time, he locked the door behind him.